Being challenged in life is inevitable. Being defeated is optional. I love this quote by Roger Crawford. Rich Nuts, what does this quote mean to you when you hear it?
Yeah, I mean, that just speaks to this deeply seated mindset of life is what you make it, right? Like things are going to happen. Things happen to all of us in different ways, challenges. But once it happens, then we make an interpretation upon it. Are we going to give up? Is this the end? Or are we going to turn it into something good? And so I think stuff continually happens to us. And then where do we go with it? Is this for me or is this against me? That first moment of decision, and maybe there's a chance, like I really love the stoicism thing because you get a chance to just pause, feel the emotions, let them wash over you, because sometimes it's really challenging things. People die or,
Yeah,
stuff happens. Then what are you going to do? And I
right.
think giving that pause instead of reacting is the key to like making it work for you.
Yeah. And as funny you mentioned that, I was having a conversation this morning with a friend, um, and we were talking about like family stuff, problems within families.
Hmm.
And he was saying that, well, you don't have to, be a part of that. Like if your family's negative, just cut them off. You don't have to be a part of that. And I was like, well, when I came into this world, meaning the free world after prison, I knew that, um, the work that I was going to do for the rest of my life was going to require to take on the energy and the feelings and the emotions and all these things of others,
Hmm.
the pain, the struggles, the hurt, in order so that I could help them and possibly guide them for healing. So a lot of the things, the adversities of life, I've learned to accept, and I've learned to be like, that's just life. We go through ups and downs, and to celebrate successes as they come, and not chase success, because there is no like final place of success, right? Because when you get there, you just want more.
Yeah.
So it's those moments. And
There's
so
no finish line. Or there's a
exactly,
finish line, but there's another race.
yeah, there's another race, and you're gonna go down, and then if you keep pushing, you'll get up. And
Yeah.
it reminds me so much of what I know about you, up to this point. We met at a Christmas gathering of a mutual friend,
Yeah.
and I usually talk to people that I feel like, just the positive energy from them. And I spoke to your wife, and then I met you, and invited you to come on the show because I really loved the things you were talking about with your own journey of battling through things from injuries, and even before that, to your business, building that, and the challenges that come with that. So it's just, for me, when I look at you, I see a person who is very resilient, and we actually used that word when we met and we talked.
Hmm.
So I'd love to just hear more about you in your life and the things you went through, those impact events that like shaped who you are today, and how you overcame some of those challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So resilience is just about not giving up, really, to me. And I think that it's so funny because people look at my life and hear my story and they're like, "Oh wow, your life must have been really hard and stuff." But from my perspective, it's the only life I've known, right? And I've never seen it as hard or perceived it as hard, so it wasn't really hard for me. It was just the way things were, right?
Hmm.
And I think that that acceptance is a key to resilience, because it's all about mindset, right? And I was telling you a story a little bit. I've only been to jail twice, and neither one of them were my fault, and we can get into those things. Um, but the first time, the birth story, I was actually born in prison, and my parents, my dad would always tell me that they were into the spoon, so they were into heroin, and they started to sell to support their habit, and then they got busted. And he said the only reason that I even exist is because they got busted, because they were very unhealthy. They were using all the time, and he's like, well, we would have sex sometimes, but we weren't
Hmm.
healthy enough to conceive a child. We were skinny and all that stuff.
Right.
And so when he told me that story, he basically said when they got busted, they went into jail for a little bit. Then they were eventually released on bail, but after they had cleaned up and kicked. And then they were standing trial for about 6 months. And during that time was the time when they were healthy and clean. And that's when I was conceived while they were on trial. They subsequently got convicted. And then I ended up being born in the Chino Correctional Facility for women. So I was born in jail. Obviously, I don't remember it.
Yeah.
I spent my first 3 months there with my mother, and then I was released just basically to my grandmother's care, and she took care of me while my dad's father while they were in jail until they got out. When they got out, my dad, he cleaned himself up and got a decent job, became a plumber for Los Angeles County. Unfortunately, my mother continued to abuse, and she ran off with me for a bit. And then she brought me back and was like, "Oh, I don't think I'm doing a good job taking care of him," me to my dad. And my dad said that I had bruises and like cigarette burns and all this stuff, and didn't look like I was in good shape. So he basically just kept me from that point forward, and I never really got to know my mother. And I have like one faint memory of her. So, that's not everyone's story, but it's my story. And to me, it's just my story. I don't have any charge around it. And that's why, and I didn't even really even know about it, honestly, until I was in my late 40s. My dad didn't tell me too much about it, just kind of, your mother has a substance abuse problem and she can't be around. And so, the one thing that I did feel kind of guilty about, emotionally distraught, was when I was about 20, I started trying to find her, and I found out she had just died like a year before from her substance abuse issue. And so I was a little bit sad that I hadn't looked earlier, but I feel like me and my dad remarried, and I had a pretty good life. We grew up in Pico Rivera, moved out to Diamond Bar. I was always a self-starter. My dad never really had to push me. He's like, you can do whatever you want, He wasn't pushing me to go to college or anything like that. And I really love sports. So my whole life I was always just like, okay, what grades do I need to get sports done to be on the sports team? So I just kind of laid back in the cut as far as school went. I didn't enjoy homework, but I was really good at taking the tests. So I would just get like B's and C's and enough to stay on the football team and the wrestling team. But then like my junior year, I was just talking to some friends, and they were all planning to go to college and stuff. And I was like, well, maybe I should go to college. And so I just turned it on a little bit. And then all of a sudden I went from like B's and C's to A's and B's. And my parents were like, what happened? I went from like a 2.2 to a 3.8.
Wow.
And they're like, you've been sandbagging this whole time.
Yeah.
And actually I had been, because when I was really little and my grandmother used to spend a lot of time taking care of me, she bought me all these books, and I learned how to do like basic math, like addition and subtraction, and read before I even started kindergarten. So I was like way ahead of all the other kids. When I got to kindergarten, they moved me up to first grade. And this was a critical time for me, because they moved me to first grade because I could read already.
Yeah.
And basically every day kids would pick on me, and they'd be like, I remember they used to sing the song, kindergarten baby born in the Navy, whatever that means. But it would just, it's like razzing me. So I would get mad, and I would just put my fists up.
Yeah.
And so I would get into a fight almost every day for my whole first year of school. And they end up holding me back, not because of I wasn't, doing the education part, but mostly because they said I had social problems. I was being bullied.
Yeah.
So I learned a very important lesson from that experience, and I started to dim my light and hide my intelligence. And basically from that point on, school was very easy for me, but I just, laid back in the cut, totally, half-assed it, and just slid through until I was a junior. And then all of a sudden I turned it on. I went to junior, I paid my way. Of course, I was paying my way through college and everything. So I went to junior college at first at Mount Sac out on the east end of Los Angeles. And then I transferred into UCLA.
That's amazing.
And, I had always wanted to become a firefighter. So I took the fire courses at Mount Sac. I transferred into UCLA. I thought about some other careers. I considered law school, and I did an internship in Hollywood, which was pretty fun, but I decided it wasn't the career for me. And the funny thing is, too, I also joined the Navy Reserves to pay my way through college. There's a GI Bill that helped me. So I basically worked part-time. I went to school. I was on the cheerleading squad which again, something I never expected to
Right.
happen to me. But I was really fit, and these cute girls came up to a friend and me at the gym and were like, "Hey, we're looking for some more guys to join the team. Would you guys be interested?" And one thing led to another, and next thing you know, I was on the cheer squad for 2 years at UCLA,
Wow.
which was pretty awesome because in
Yeah.
1995 we won the NCAA basketball championship. So going to all the
Nice.
tournament and being there for that. So, I had this like really amazing, almost like Forrest Gump type of life, not where I
Yeah.
was like, if things just were happening and they just showed up and I just was like, all right, let's do it. What's showing up for me? What can I do? And I just kept, following my curiosity. I think that's been a
Mm.
key, and overcoming, adversity in whatever form it came. So
Yeah.
I think it's all like, it's up here. Because if you picture yourself as a victim, or you think you're a victim, or you want to blame everyone else or everything else for your problems, then, you disempower yourself. Then you don't have any responsibility in what's happening to you. So really taking responsibility for your actions and to what led you to whatever challenges you may be having,
Yeah.
that's where you grow, because you're like, oh, I did this, and then that led to this, and then that led to that, and it might be like years in the making, but
Right.
you can see where your choices led you to the place where you're not happy.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. And you mentioned something that you were like a self-starter,
hmm
and that's a powerful thing because when you're growing up and like your mom's not around,
yeah.
like a lot of the kids that I work with, they don't have a parent, they have single parent, or they don't have any parents at all. um, they end up getting pulled in all these different directions, and a lot of that leads to drugs and
hmm
um, gang life and all that stuff. What do you think kept you from going down that path of like experimenting with drugs and then getting, I don't know if you did or not, but getting going down that negative wrong path, and instead you pursued all these other great things?
Yeah, I think there was like a couple things that were influential there. So my dad, he was sober after that. He didn't drink or anything. Um, and basically, he had told me the story about drugs and how it ruined his life and all these things.
Mm,
So I was super anti-drug. I mean, they were
yeah.
around in high school.
Yeah.
People were doing drugs or whatever, and I'd be like, no. I only drank even a few times in high school, although there were parties with, beer and whatever. I just was like not participating just because of my life story and my background and how
Mm,
my dad had told me how drugs and alcohol had ruined his life. So, I stayed pretty clean. So I think I saw my dad, maybe he did get drunk like twice in
mhm,
in my 50 years of knowing him. He passed a couple of years ago,
mm,
but so that was pretty influential. Even when I transferred into UCLA, I was in a fraternity and everything, and there was lots of alcohol, and I did drink quite a bit in
mhm.
college, but I always stayed away from drugs, and I was a super anti-drug guy. And all the guys in the house were always trying to get me to try this and try that, but it was just not my thing. I was
Yeah.
like pretty anti-drug. And um, the other thing that was really influential, so my dad, he was a plumber, and he wasn't super wealthy or anything, but after the kindergarten, first grade experience, he was like, well, maybe public school isn't the best for him. So he put me in a private school, like a
Mm,
Christian school.
right.
And, he worked very hard to keep me there, did
Yeah.
overtime and all that stuff. And actually, we used to go work on the weekends, do side jobs,
Yeah.
because my dad basically worked all the time. He was a total workaholic. And he kind of looped me into that stuff, which was good because
Mm,
I think I learned that if you want to like earn money, you go out and do it. You get a skill set, and then you just find ways to make it happen. And so, maybe from the time I was like 6 or 7 until I was about 14 or something, I would work a lot of side jobs with him on the weekends. Um, and the thing is, he never treated me. I never remember him babying me or treating me like a little kid. It was always like
mm,
even when we'd go like fishing in the Sierras, we'd have a 1 or 2 mile hike. He'd be like, "All right, grab your fishing pole, get your tackle box, let's go." And I'm like
mm.
6, and I'm like, "All right,
Yeah.
let's do it." So he never treated me like a kid. He always treated me like an adult, and he just, I think, instilled in me that independence, that I could do it, that I could be anything that I want, that I was smart enough, strong enough, whatever, and
Yeah.
simply
Yeah.
enough to do whatever I wanted. And that just gave me that independent mindset. And it wasn't like, other than that stuff that happened in first grade and kindergarten,
Mm.
that was like one thing where I kind of wasn't super empowered, and it took me a long time to unlearn that. Just because it was like a traumatic experience, I guess, as a
Yeah.
child to get bullied and stuff. So I think just having that mindset that I could do anything and that never being treated like a child and always being like, my dad was pretty open with me talking and stuff and like, all right, well, you can do it.
Yeah.
I have faith in you,
Yeah.
and
Is,
that
is
was
that
inspiring to me.
is that like, because your father is a remarkable man,
Yeah.
and like I always tell people that there's this thing in the world that people depict heroes as like the guy you see on TV with the cape and he saves the world and all that. But the real heroes in my life that I've encountered are people like that who've been through something
Hmm.
and then come back, change their life, and then create a better life for the people around them, like he did for you. I mean, he
Yeah.
and leading by example,
Yeah.
and telling you things like you could be whatever you want, and those things are so important. Would that be your advice to parents who are have got kids in their life, like just giving them like
Yeah.
advice, like would that be something that you would be like supporting, that kids that parents are like that in that way?
Yeah. I mean, I never had my own children. I always wanted to, it just never worked out for me.
Yeah.
But I always, I've witnessed a lot of other families, friends, fellow firefighters that
Mm.
were, having struggles with their kids and stuff. And I just realized that, like, if you want, and let's just talk about boys and men specifically here,
Yeah.
if you want your, son or to grow up and be, a leader or powerful, you got to just treat them like an adult and give them the opportunity to make mistakes, to
Mm.
make their own choices. I think there's a lot of like helicopter parenting, and that's totally disempowering. Then they end up with children, grown men that
Yeah.
still act like teenagers.
Yeah.
Well, why is that? It's because you never really give them the responsibility to make their own mistakes and learn from those things. And I think that that's super critical in
Yeah.
someone's evolution as a human from a child to an adult. And not being treated like a child then really empowers you, like, oh wow, I get to make these decisions, and if something screws up, it's on me.
Mm.
Then that's really a lesson for life, right? Then, oh, my dad's always taking care of me and they handle everything, I don't do my laundry. Like, since I was so independent, both my parents, my dad remarried and my stepmom worked and my dad worked, so I'd get home from school and it's like I'd do my own laundry, I'd
Mm-hmm.
make my own food, I'd do my homework. By the time I got home, I had all my stuff done already.
Yeah.
Of course, I love to go out and play and ride my bike and all that stuff too, but I had to learn how to manage my time. That was
Yeah.
another thing, and that's an adult skill.
Yeah.
So if you want to have a healthy adult, you treat your children like an adult. I mean, obviously, to a degree, right? You're going to
Mm-hmm.
be, but you give them the opportunity to show up like an adult, to behave like an adult, to make decisions. And guess what? When they grow up, you have an adult instead of a large child.
Yeah.
And I've seen that a lot of times where it just disempowers the children to just helicopter and do everything for them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of my take on it.
That's great advice. I
Yeah.
agree, and I think when I went to prison, I was homeless and living in the streets since from 13 till I went to prison, and going to prison from 18 all the way into 17 years, and I got out 3 years 6 months ago. And had I not went through that, as tough as that was for me, then I would have been like one of those kids that you mentioned, like just completely just like not able to deal with the things in the world. But me getting forced into that situation, I had to grow up quick. I had to become a man quick and learn what that meant, go through mistakes, you know, get my head busted a few times to learn. And then through that, it created a better person within me. And it doesn't need to be that extreme for a lot of young men, but I think you're right that you have to treat the young man like almost like he's an adult, because he's going to go out into an adult world at some point, and if he's not prepared, then there's going to be all kind of things that go on that can lead that young man into the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So
Even more suffering.
yeah, exactly. So I completely agree. That's great advice. So talk about being a firefighter. You said you went to UCLA. You became a firefighter.
Yeah. I was always just a dream of mine, and I was searching for different careers. Kind of, like I said, I explored law school and Hollywood, but I just didn't necessarily want a desk job, and sitting behind a desk all the time, it just felt like I was dying. I did an internship at a law firm, and I was like, this is not for me.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is too, I would ask people questions like, hey, how do you like your job? And they would always be like, oh, I make really good money. I'm like, that's not the question.
Yeah.
How do you actually like what you're doing? And most of them hated it, but they were making such good money, working all the time. They never got to see their families. That was not something I wanted to choose. And same thing with the Hollywood. I was working for a producer, and I was talking to all the executives, and they're like, oh, I make really good money, but I never see my family and all these kind of things. So I didn't really want that life. And then when I would talk to firefighters, they were like, oh man, I love my job. I feel good about what I do. I get a lot of time off. I get to spend time with my family and all this stuff. So I was like, I think that's what I want to do. It's outdoor, it's physical. I mean, these are things that, it's not a desk job, it's always exciting. You can feel good about what you're doing. You get the respect of the community, which was something that I wasn't really, wasn't aware of how that would feel. But after I became a firefighter, and you start to little moms would always be like, oh, say hi to the firemen,
Yeah.
And they'd come over and say hi, and we'd show them around the engine and that kind of stuff. It was cool. I really loved it. And it encouraged and built upon the confidence that was already there as a man, that I could do whatever I wanted, that I could, succeed, that and I had a team and training now to help me do those things. And, when I took the test, so like for Los Angeles County Fire Department, which I work for, there were, they would have a test like every 5 to 10 years. So about every 7 years or so. And the test I took, there were 22,000 applicants. And in the end, they only hired about 200, 250 people off that list over a 7-year period. So I got hired in the third class. And I did really well on the written exam, and I had already taken a bunch of the courses and kind of got my EMT. So I kind of was gearing myself up for that. But then once I got into the fire academy, it wasn't that much of a challenge for me. Just because physically I was already in great shape. And I think that helps prepare you so that you're not like struggling and winded, if you have all your wits about you because you're not like maxed out on your physical output, then you can still contact with your brain and do the different hose lays and drills and all that kind of stuff. And I just found it to be, like I said, really rewarding and super empowering as a man, and then I became a paramedic. So I was 18 years a paramedic, 20 years a fireman. And I just had all these incredible experiences. And as a paramedic, I brought 7 people back from the dead.
Wow.
Which I was like, man, that's not very many out of all the people that have gone on that were dead. But if you think about it, someone's clinically dead when you show up, the chances are it's like 0.02% chance that they can even come back from that.
Wow.
So to have those 7 rescues where someone was clinically dead when we arrived, and then they had return of spontaneous circulation, so heartbeat comes back, possibly breathing, different situations. But I thought about it later and I reflected upon it, and I was like, hey, that's 7 people's mother, father, grandpa, and maybe they only lived for a week or 2 days or whatever, but maybe their family got to come and say goodbye in the hospital, which is important.
Yeah.
So, having that experience where you bring people back from the dead and where you're, rescuing people in fires and animals and all that is pretty, I feel very grateful to have had that experience. As challenging as it was, this is the funny thing too, is people are always like, well, how do you like being an entrepreneur compared to being a fireman? I was like, for me, being a fireman was way more natural and easy. And there were like moments of intense stress, physically demanding, great. And then, okay, everything's done. 30 minutes later, you're back and you're chilling. And that's more like the evolutionary stress that we evolved with. So, and then when you're off, you're off. So it's a different thing than starting your own business where you constantly have some level of stress. Like any moment someone could call you, there's no holiday, right? It's like, oh, this happened at the factory. We need you here now. So it's like, you always have that in the back of your mind, and you're trying to continually solve problems, which I love solving problems, but it's been a little bit of a challenge to not get that break.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Like as an entrepreneur, you're always on or working in some aspect. Even if you're on vacation, like you said, your mind might be there. You might not be fully present in the vacation because you're thinking about something. Even if you try to cut off ties, it's because it's like your baby, right?
yeah,
You know, and no matter where your child is you're going to be thinking about him or her. And same thing, kind of like when you're building a business. So
yeah,
I completely get that. And I never thought about like that with paramedics and, you know, like the fact that, you know, you bring people back to life. That's such a powerful thing that I never even considered. I know that, you know, paramedics and firefighters do amazing work and you always see them and respect them
mm,
and just great people and doing good work, doing service. But never thought about that. That like every life you've saved, I mean,
yeah,
you've saved a world in a sense because they all have their own worlds that they come from, you know, and that's an amazing thing to really acknowledge.
yeah.
So, how long were you doing? I mean, you did firefighting, and then how did you end up getting out of firefighting and doing the work you do now as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I started with a fire department at Los Angeles County in 1998. I got hired as a recruit, went through
Hmm.
the fire academy, and then I retired in 2019 after 20 years of service. Uh, and I had worked in various areas like West Hollywood and Inglewood and then
Hmm.
Malibu. Um, Actually, when I was new and had just become a paramedic, I think I was on the job about 3 or 4 years, is when 9/11 happened.
Hmm.
And this was a super emotional fire department story I'd like to share. So
Yeah.
9/11 happened, and where I was working at the time in Inglewood, it's where the SoFi Stadium is now. It used to be Hollywood Park. That was my first in district, and we were right in the flight path to LAX. So it was so surreal because if you remember 9/11, they shut all the flight traffic down. So
Hmm.
there were no planes for the first time, in the whole year or two I had been there. So that was pretty
Wow.
interesting. But I was there when we saw it on television, and everything came down, which was tragic. And there were about five guys from my station that wanted to go out and volunteer in New York to help out with the FDNY. And so we volunteered with FDNY Fire Department. Once we could fly, we flew out there, and we're like, "Hey, we're here to do whatever you want. Like, we know a lot of firemen died as do the widows need help at the house, taking care of the kids, mowing the
Hmm.
lawn, take out whatever needs to be done. Just let us know. We're here to
Hmm.
help on a personal level, not necessarily at the
Yeah.
event."
Yeah.
And so their whole response was like, "Okay, we're going to send a van around and we're going to pick you up and we're going to take you to funerals, because we're
Hmm.
having 3 to 6 funerals a day for all the guys that we lost, and there's just not enough
Hmm.
people showing up because it's spread so thin. Plus, a bunch of our guys are still working at the site." And so, yeah, they'd pick us up in a van. We'd go from like hotel to hotel. We'd pick up guys from Chicago, from Ohio, from all over the country. We'd go to these funerals, and basically we'd all just cry our eyes out and
Hmm.
mourn. And I kind of felt like, in a way, we were mourning for the nation at that point. I didn't really realize that until later, but we go to 3 funerals, we'd cry our eyes out, and then the FDNY guys like, "All right, let's go to the bar and get some beers now." And so
Hmm.
we'd go have drinks afterward. But yeah, so we spent a week doing that, and it was a pretty intense experience.
Hmm.
So I've had all these like really intense but rewarding in a way experiences through the fire department family and
Yeah.
career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that you were in jail twice.
Yes. Yeah.
The second time, did that happen later on later on in life, or
Yeah.
when did that? And what was that story?
Yeah. So I was 24 years old, and this was when I was still like, I had been drinking at college, but I didn't
Mhm.
really do any drugs. Maybe I'd smoked marijuana once or something at that point. And I went out to a club. This is a really long story, but I'm going to give you the short version, and then we can drop the YouTube link in the
Yeah, yeah,
in the show
absolutely.
notes, and people can watch. Luckily, it was caught on film. So I went to a club in Hollywood, and it was one of my friend's birthdays, and we had a few drinks before. We met up at someone's house, and we went to the club, and I think maybe I had like 3 or 4 drinks at that time, and I was about 30 pounds heavier. I was like 215 pounds, so I was pretty
Mhm.
stout at the time. and I drank a lot. So 4 drinks wasn't really a lot for me. But last thing I remember, I was at this club and I was walking across the dance floor, and the music got really slow and like heavy beat bass. And I was like, whoa, maybe I'm getting kind of drunk or something. And then next thing I know, I was on top of a Burger King surrounded by a SWAT team with a helicopter flying overhead. I had one shoe on, my shirt was gone, my hand was bleeding. And
Wow.
there's like, cops yelling at me to get down and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, what happened? So basically what happened was I got drugged at the club, and
Wow.
the bouncers kicked me out for meeting girls with my hands. So I was getting touchy
Wow.
feely. I don't remember any of this. And then apparently I was irate on the street. And so this couple that I had just met that night, they were like friends of my friend. Because I was about to get arrested for being drunk in public out in front of the club. And they talked to LAPD guy, and they're like, hey, he's okay. He's with us. He just had a little too much to drink. We're going home. He's going to sleep on our couch. So the police officers let me go with them.
Mhm.
And then it was on La Brea and Hollywood where the club was. And then we walked down La Brea towards Sunset. And apparently it was like a Saturday night in Hollywood at the time. There's like,
Mhm.
people driving around cruising and like gangbangers and whatever. And I
Mhm.
was being like irate and just talking trash and being belligerent with people. So the guy who was much smaller than me, he was getting kind of, fearful for himself and for his girlfriend. So he's like, I don't know what to do. You're being crazy, whatever. He told me this later. And he's like, he said that I grabbed him. I gave him the kiss of death. And I said, you broke my heart. And I literally just threw him to the ground. And he's like, that's it. I'm out of here.
What?
So he abandoned
Wow.
me. Again, this is all story. So he
Jeez.
abandoned me on the corner, as he should. I'm not mad about it. This is a safety
Yeah.
thing. On the corner of La Brea and Sunset, and there's a Burger King there. Apparently, I went into the Burger King. I tried to order some food. I didn't have any money. They kind of shooed me out. So I did the next logical thing. I went on the roof of Burger King and I started throwing the paint cans off the roof. They had paint
Wow.
cans up there that they used to paint like the 99-cent Whopper or whatever into the street on Sunset. And I do remember this part. So I remember a couple pieces. The manager from the Burger King, she came out and she was like yelling at me. She's like, sir, if you don't get down off the roof right now, I'm calling the cops. And I was like, wow, it's kind of funny. She's calling me sir right now, because I'm on the roof being an idiot.
Right. Jesus.
And I had torn off the little satellite communication disc. I threw it across the parking lot like a discus, and it hit like one of
Oh man.
the glass windows, which broke. And then the alarm started going off, and she's like, that's it, I'm calling the cops. So I call the cops, and it ends up being a 3.5-hour standoff.
Oh man.
Um, and at the end, they end up shooting me down with rubber bullets. And
Wow. How'd that
yes,
feel?
not great. I was kind of coming out of it, and I was like, what's
Yeah.
going on? I'm on the roof, I'm surrounded. And, interlock your fingers on your hand, turn around, get down. I thought they meant get down off the roof, so I started to kind of walk faster
Mhm.
towards the ladder. And then I just heard this poof, poof. Next thing you know, I was on the ground bleeding. They came over. I didn't resist because I was concussed, basically. They took me into custody and then had a whole court thing. But luckily, so when I got out, the internet wasn't what it is now. It was like a 4-day thing. I got released on my own recognizance. I had no
Mhm.
priors, no history, a speeding ticket or something like that. And so they ended up charging me with felony vandalism. And
Mm.
I got released on my own recognizance. I got out of jail and I started doing some research to find out, because to me, it was like the way I was behaving was like PCP.
Yeah.
But I never heard anyone getting PCP slipped in their drink. I had heard of roofies and
Right.
GHB. So I started calling around LAPD and I asked them, like, what's going on? Like, what kind of drugs are, I'm doing a research project at UCLA. I had already graduated, but I
Mhm.
was just pretending like I was.
Yeah.
And, what kind of drugs are kids getting drugged with and what's kind of happening and blah, blah, blah. And so finally I talked to Trinka Parada. I remember her specifically. She was LAPD narcotics lead detective at the time. And I was asking her all these questions. And finally she was like, wait a minute, were you the guy that was on top of Burger King the other day? She just like kind of put it together, I guess, by the questions I was asking.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'd like to take you to lunch and talk to you about your experience. And like, obviously, if you have a pending case, you don't necessarily want to go.
Right. Yeah.
So I didn't tell my lawyer. I was still searching for answers. So I went to lunch with her and I told her what I remembered. And she believed my story. She corroborated it. And she ended up getting me out of all the trouble. She testified on my behalf. She
Wow.
saved me from, getting convicted of a felony, which would have then I
Yeah.
was already in band one with the fire department, so I was about to get hired. So
Wow.
if I got convicted, my life would have gone in a totally different direction. But
Yeah.
this woman believed my story and she testified on my behalf. I mean, it took a lot of time and money and effort to do that, but I ended up getting out of the charges.
Wow.
So
And so it was recorded by, it's on YouTube. Who recorded it?
at the time, like, this was 97, I think. So there were like freelance video guys going around and
Mm.
they would listen to the police scanner. Whenever they heard like some incident going down, they would go to the
Wow.
scene, film it, and then they would sell it, the footage, to like the news channels and stuff. So yeah, apparently there's 3.5 hours of footage. I haven't seen it all, and I'm leaving out huge parts of the story, but that's the main gist of it. You can watch it on YouTube. It's Burger Standoff, or Psycho on the Roof, which is a pretty funny
Yeah.
version that was on America's Dumbest Criminals. Lucky me.
Wow. This
Uh,
is crazy. Like your life, like Forrest Gump, it could be a movie, right?
yeah, we're working on that actually.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's incredible, man. And to
yeah,
be sitting here now and like doing the amazing work you're doing, and
yeah,
you started your company, and want to learn about that. Rich Nuts.
yeah,
Where'd that come from? How'd you start it? Why? Like any entrepreneur, every business comes from something. An idea sparked from something.
yeah.
And what are you doing with it now? Where can people find it and learn about it and all that stuff?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, it came through the fire department. So basically, I worked in Malibu the last 12 years, and I had already started eating really healthy, organic, like a paleo style diet, which basically is grain free for the most part. And I was feeling great and healthy and super
Mm-hmm.
clean with my diet. And I started well, we'd be on these big brush fires,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not really any healthy food available. There's MREs, which are the military rations, which are
Mm-hmm.
just a bunch of chemical BS,
Yeah.
not something I would want to eat at the time. And then sometimes fast food. And then there were prison crews. So there would be like the sack lunches with the
Yeah.
old bologna and not great quality food either.
Mm-hmm.
It's prison food, which we
Yeah.
know is not great.
Right. Yeah.
No one's going there to eat on purpose.
Not at all. You're just eating to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I started eating. I really liked cashews, and I would eat
Mm-hmm.
raw cashews. I would eat snack bars too, but you can only eat so many of those things, and you might
Yeah.
be out there like 5, 6, 10 hours. And so we'd bring our own snacks with us in our bag or in
Mm-hmm.
our pockets in our brush firefighting gear. And I noticed that every time I would eat a bunch of cashews, and I might eat like a 1 pound bag throughout 10 hour
Mm-hmm.
shift. It was like a couple, and you don't have time to sit down anyway, so it's a couple handfuls here and there. Keep doing that all day, and I noticed that instead of getting like the energy I was expecting, I would get like gassy and bloated,
Mm-hmm.
had brain fog, and I feel kind of out of it and just terrible in general. So I was like, it must be something to do with the nuts. So I did a bunch of research and I found out about these things called lectins and phytic acid, which are generally considered anti-nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And gluten would be the most famous of all lectins. So literally there's hundreds of types of chemicals that the plants use as essentially a chemical shield that would allow it to pass through a digestive system of an animal, drop out the backside, and still grow into a new plant. So like if an animal ate a fruit, then the seeds get pooped out and then
Yeah.
they can still grow. So that chemical shield blocks, inhibits, and prevents digestion, causing symptoms like gas, bloating, brain fog, weight gain, a
Mm-hmm.
whole bunch of stuff. And so I was like, oh, okay, it must have something to do with these nuts. And then I found there was a way to mitigate them, and that was by sprouting them. So basically, to sprout them, you soak them in water, you allow them a time to germinate. They go into a growth phase, they drop all those defense mechanisms, and they become more digestible and more nutritious. That's
Wow.
the very short version of it. So experimenting with that, and then the only problem is after you soak them, they're cold and mushy, or they're mushy, and
Yeah.
then they get moldy fast. So you put them in the fridge. Now they're cold and mushy, and it's like not a great experience. It wouldn't really help me on the fire line.
Yeah.
So I started experimenting with the old dehydrator that my dad had in the garage from like the 80s, and some sage and rosemary from my garden,
Mm-hmm.
and when I lived in Topanga, and I created this sage and rosemary sprouted cashew, and I just carried it around in like a mason jar. Every time, I'm very like giving, generous person. So we'd go to parties and events, and I'd be like, "Hey, you guys want to try these nuts I made?" And people look at me like, "You made nuts?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
"What are you talking about?" I'd go through the whole story, and then
Yeah.
I'd share them with them. Within about 3 to 6 months, every time I walk in the room, my friends, fellow firefighters, or family would be like, "Hey, you got any more of those nuts? You got any more of those nuts?" So
Yeah.
I would just keep giving them away. And then I
Mm.
realized after about 6 months, I'm spending like $1,000 a month on cashews. I'm getting organic cashews
Yeah.
from Sprouts, sprouting them, running them through this process, and just giving them away. I love you guys, but you're going to have to start paying me. This is not
Yeah.
sustainable.
Exactly.
So people were like, "All right, how much do you want?" And then that was how essentially it started.
Wow.
From there, we went to like farmers markets. Farmers markets was great because I had all these people that knew me and loved me, and they would pay to do it. So I'm like, but they're biased. Let's see if strangers will. So going to the farmers market and trying to sample things, it was really a great experience for me because I got to learn how to talk about the product and why it
Mhm.
was different. You know, people are always trying to sample you. I was here at the one on Melrose for a while, and people
Mhm.
are trying to hand out samples everywhere, and most people are like, "No, I'm not interested."
Yeah.
And I'll be like, "Hey, you want to try some nuts?" And they'd be like, look at me and kind of give me the
Yeah.
grimace and keep walking because everyone's had some nuts. And
Yeah.
I was like, "You want to try the best nuts ever?" And especially men would be like, "I'll be the judge of that." They'd come over, "I'll tell
Yeah.
you if these are good." And then they would try them, and I would ask them if they knew what sprouting was and the health benefits,
Yeah.
and I can get into my whole educational spiel. And then, it started, I found that there was a market. And during that time, since we were making them at home, I was able to experiment a lot and like change the recipes. Oh, this is too sweet. This is too
Right.
salty. I would get feedback. I developed a whole bunch of
Amazing.
other flavors, and that's how it started.
That's incredible. And these things are really good. I tried them when at the event we were at,
Yeah.
loved them, and then got these from Irwan.
Yeah.
What other locations are you guys in besides
Um,
Irwan? And
so we're in a bunch of spots in Southern California. So like Lazy Acres,
yeah.
Lassen's, Bristol Farms,
Hmm.
Erewhon. We're working on getting into Sprouts now.
Yeah.
You can get them also on Amazon or our website, which is richnuts.com.
Hmm.
It's super simple to get them. Yeah.
Yeah. And the name? Or
Rich Nuts.
yeah.
Yeah. How did it come about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't really want it to be about me, but the people
Right.
on the team in the beginning were like, "No, it has to be about you. Like your
Yeah.
story is great. Like we want to,"
Absolutely.
because you solved a serious issue that you were having, and other people are going to be able to benefit from this. So we want you to be able to tell your story. And I was like, "No, no, no."
Yeah.
So I fought that for a little bit, and then I was like, "Okay, I get it. I get it." And so we named them Rich Nuts because they're rich in nutrition. They're also rich in flavor, and they
Hmm.
happen to be made by a guy named Rich. So it's kind of like a triple entendre.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's fitting. And it is this. It is your story that makes it even more of an amazing thing because you've overcome so much in your life, so many different ways you could have went other than what you went.
Yeah.
You could have had the victim mentality, like so many people do that grow up with a parent who struggles with addiction or anything or been to prison,
Yeah.
and you were born in prison.
Yeah.
And it's like you've accomplished all these great things. You still had different things in life that you went through that, like the rooftop experience. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing, man, that you're here doing this work. And I think that it's truly meant for us to meet. I didn't know anything really about you
Yeah.
like that. And I guess that's what they say, right? Don't ever judge a book by its cover. You never know what story somebody's holding within them. But
Yeah.
one thing is that I feel everybody has some type of battle in life, something that they've gone through and or still going through, and we have to get through it. And the resiliency
Yeah.
piece and what that means is everything. And another thing you said that's really been coming to me lately, I've been hearing it a lot, is curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you research things, you found a problem, you identified something that it was causing within you, you looked into it and to seek that out, and then you found, okay, well, I can create a solution to that.
Yeah.
And so curiosity, I think, is a big part of the journey of self-discovery, but also creating change in this world.
100%.
And do you think you've always had that since you were a kid, that curiosity?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting, the curiosity thing, because it's so important, right?
Hmm.
You just like kind of follow your intuition
Right.
and use that to guide you. Because even in school, like there were some courses that were really easy, but I wasn't really curious about them, and I didn't do as well. And then I would be in this one class that was like super hard, but I was like really into the material and curious about learning it. And then I would do, exceptional in that. So really like checking in with yourself and like asking questions and finding out like what you're curious about. Like we're all going to have different things that call us and we find interesting, but really trusting that intuitive guidance. Well, what is this? Why, well, maybe I could find out more about it. And then, now we have so many amazing research tools, which is great, but like creating these flavors, people are like, well, how did you create all these different flavors? I've created 10 flavors. We have 6 in production right now, but what I did was I tried like everything, and then 80% of them were just terrible. I knew they weren't going anywhere. And then I would get those 2 out of 10 and I would experiment with them and then, refine them and take really good notes and just kind of break it down, like changing the ratios. How does that work? What happens with this? And evaluating the process. So it was really a process of trial and error and continuing to follow that curiosity until I came up with flavors that were subtle and actually accentuate the natural flavor of the nut instead of overpower it.
Right.
And that was a big thing for me too, was like when I was a kid, my dad would always be like, hey, we're going to eat this healthy thing, because he got into healthy eating for a long time. And I was like, okay, great. This is going to taste like lawn clippings or cardboard.
Right.
It's going to taste terrible, but I have to choke it down because it's good for me. And when I created these, I wanted them to taste great and be good for you. So it's like a win-win in that situation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think following your curiosity is a good way to get in touch with your intuition and to let it guide you. And with these experiences, you never know how they're going to turn out. Like even the Burger King situation, I mean, for a long time, that was like the worst night of my life, right? It cost me $12,000 from legal fees. I got sued by the insurance company for $27,000. Luckily, I settled for $5,000. So there's 10 grand right there. And then I had to pay the owner $2,000 in restitution. But for the first couple of years, they could put it on television as much as they wanted because it was a newsworthy story. But then after a couple of years, they started coming to me to license it. And everyone had already seen it. So I was like, okay, whatever. So to date, I've received $19,000 in compensation for licensing fees. So I'm up, $7 grand overall.
Awesome.
But it takes, it took years and years and years for that to happen. And then obviously now looking back on it, I have this amazing story to tell. And it's on YouTube and I can share it with people and people are just blown away by it because they wouldn't expect that something like that would happen to me.
Yeah. And it's your story is very inspirational. And it's like I tell people that there's always two responses we can have to everything in life, right? And really the things that we can control and the things that we can't control. And so the things that we can't control because they've already happened in like that incident that you went through and like my situation in prison, I can't control the past anymore. It happened, but I can control how I respond to it now, and in utilizing that to help people or to do good.
Yeah.
And to be able to be a leading example of, that you can make mistakes and you can go through some stuff, but you can turn that around and do great things in life and maybe even take that experience and draw something from it to make you stronger and other people around you stronger.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about, man. Resiliency is like, you're going to go through something, but how are you going to respond to it?
Yeah.
And so that's such a key thing. And your dad, when you're talking about him, and I think about him, and it's all these little things that he did when you were young that I feel kind of impacted who you are today.
Yeah.
Right? Like the work ethic, like you could do whatever you want in life. The healthy eating.
Yeah.
It's like, these are all qualities that like you've embodied now in your life and in your company.
Yeah.
The health aspect. And so as men out there, including ourselves, I'm not a father either, but we're definitely role models to others, because a man once told me that the difference between role models and mentors is that people pick their role models, mentors pick their mentee. And so people are following us and looking at us and observing us every day and hearing us and the things we say.
Yeah.
And so you to be able to share that with people that listen to my podcast, which is a lot of young people, is very important, because a lot of them are really close to where you were at when you were a kid,
Hmm.
like a mom that's suffering from addiction or some type of adversity, but to have a positive male role model to come in at some point and tell them those things is so important.
Yeah.
So I think that's a powerful message, man.
Yeah. Well, and we learn
Yeah.
by observing, right?
Yeah.
So we observe our parents and how they behave, and then oftentimes we model that behavior.
Yeah.
Sometimes we may rebel against it and do the exact opposite, but it definitely influences us
Yeah.
to a great degree. It's interesting you say that about the role model thing too, because if you think about it, it's really important to pick the men you hang around with, right? Because it's a reflection upon you.
Mm.
And if you hang out with a guy that's, dishonest, or, you always have to watch out for him, or, it's like maybe you're trying to mentor him and bring him along, but you also have to be aware that, those people are the ones that can get you into trouble, can
Mm.
get you incarcerated. They do something, you try to help them cover it up. Next thing you know, you're getting in trouble for it too, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be very mindful around the people you hang around with,
Yeah.
especially the guys, because if there's a guy that's a wild card or a liability,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're going to walk away clean because he did something stupid.
Yeah.
You definitely a lot of times get into trouble. So it's important to be very mindful about who you spend your time with,
Mm.
and you know spending time with people that inspire you to be better. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah.
And you want to do the same for them
Yeah.
in different ways, right? We all hold different aspects of the masculine, and how can we share that with each other in a way that that's empowering.
Yeah.
So
So it's New Year's Eve,
yeah,
and what are your any goals for 2025?
yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, well, there's obviously a lot of stuff going on with Rich Nuts, so continuing to grow and expand our sales and our production capacity.
Mm.
The big thing is scaling up a brand and the expense, and doing so in a way that's responsible, right? Because you don't want to go out and buy $10 million worth of equipment
Mm-hmm.
when you're only doing 500,000 in sales, so you
Yeah.
have to like continue to grow it
Yeah.
strategically. So continuing to grow the business, continuing to be a good husband to my wife,
Nice.
and an even better husband. Like, I know that I'm not a bad husband, but I feel like there's always room for improvement, and never really. That's the thing too, is I'm never really satisfied with how I'm showing up. Like, I want to continue to improve, that like constant, never-ending improvement. It's a Tony Robbins thing
Mm-hmm.
that I read, that I learned, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm already doing that, but this is like just puts a framework to it.
Yeah.
It's like if you continue to improve yourself, it's going to reflect in everything you're doing, the people you hang around with, the way your family life unfolds. It's all tied together.
Yeah.
And so continuing to do the inner work to improve yourself, to let go. Like, my dad taught me a lot of good things. There's also a lot of bad stuff too, and
Mm-hmm.
things I had to unlearn that are patterns that you know don't necessarily serve my highest good.
Yeah.
And since they're ingrained since childhood, they're kind of hard to let go of. So I do a lot of self-improvement work, breath work, meditation. So I
Mm-hmm.
want to just continue to be the best version of me that I can be. That's my goal. And so how do I get there? Introspection
Yeah.
is a big part of it. Physical stuff is great. I love to use my body I've always been into surfing and snowboarding and doing all these different types of sports
Yeah.
and exploring the world, and just really traveling and seeing beautiful cultures. So I hope to continue more travel and business success, and I think physical physical health is so important, and it's often overlooked, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people don't want to spend money on like quality products, but they'll go buy drugs or alcohol, and you're like, how much money do you spend on a table at the club, and
Yeah.
you don't want to pay $5 for whatever.
Yeah.
So if you think about it that way, like, and one of them is obviously good for you and one is not necessarily.
Yeah.
So like, being mindful of where we put our attention and where we put our finances, and how that reflects on us physically, because you might be super wealthy, but if your health isn't there and you can't do anything and you're bedridden, what good is it? So
Yeah.
making sure to do those self-care and those loving practices that, nourish your physical body and your mental body and that's high priority for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, man. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Appreciate meeting you, and I'll have links to all of your stuff, including the YouTube channel
Yeah.
in the description. And man, I feel like there's so much more I want to learn about you and explore. So maybe we can connect again in time,
Yeah.
see where you're at, see where everything's at. And I just appreciate your time, man, and all the great advice and everything that you've given here today. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.